my father's name. I was born in the early 50s, classic baby boomer, but I never had a story about my father. So really this was a work of investigation for me in the true sense of all those sort of layers of meanings of the word reconnaissance. It was a detective story on a personal level and a historical level as well. I spent probably most of last year researching my father's story through bits of old photographs and reading the history of the Pacific War. I used water as the continuing leitmotif, the theme that linked the different elements of the story, because as it turned out, my father, it's very handy to start it right there.
Yeah.
That's a picture of my father in the little sailing boat, and on the back it says, last sail in Manana before he went to war the next day, and he sold it to the other man in the boat. And so this is how I pieced the story together with little bits of photos from the family collection. But I had only ever met him a couple of times in my 20s, and he was still a pretty broken man, an alcoholic. And that's the reason I was never really given a story, because I grew up in that sort of post-war, well-off suburban Catholic environment, but you didn't talk about different stuff. It was a difficult story to uncover, because as I grew up, there was an unspoken, like a black hole that everybody used to walk around, but nobody talked about. And my mum never spoke about it because she didn't want to say anything bad, but you pick up all this stuff. And in going there, I discovered that, it was really an incredibly both exhilarating and traumatic experience of young men. Probably he suffered from post-traumatic stress for the rest of his life. Never recovered, wasn't diagnosed till the 1980s, but never really acknowledged it. And so the work, in fact, is a witness and a recognition to him. It's not that I think I should have gone there earlier. In fact, I think I could never have done this story when either my father or my mother were alive, because it's something they never dealt with. But the fundamental recognition for me is that the most quintessential identity as a human being is that stereotype, cliche that you have to know who you are and where you come from, and you have to open the closed windows, because it does pass down through the generations in one way or another if you don't know at heart your story. So that's what this was about. The other extraordinary coincidence, I'm nearly finished, was that when Steve asked me to do this, he said, we're going to Manila. I hadn't really looked in my father's logbook, and I thought, he was based up north somewhere, I'll have a look. I wonder if he went to the Philippines. All the intense combat stuff, all of it was in the Philippines. And his squadron, when they were out of East Dam in Darwin, was based in Leyte Gulf in the Philippines with MacArthur. Oh. So that was like an incredible gift that I had to deal with. Any questions?
Where did you get the footage?
I went to the Australian War Memorial, and I looked online at all their footage of Catalina stuff, and I put in an application to use it, and they gave me about $2,000 worth, because you paid per second. Because it's not a commercial thing, they allowed me to use this as long as I acknowledge them.
And Pip, the hats, they're actually translation from the actual flight logs.
Yeah, these maps are digital printing on modern sort of banner material, Tyloban, printed in Melbourne. And they're taken from photographs that I've taken of the escape maps. That's the other thing. I had a few things that came to me. The logbook, the original helmet. The photo there is the same helmet before he went to war. That's it, after war stuff. And a number of what were called escape maps printed on acetate brown or silk, which the part, I thought they were navigational maps, so they're not. They're actually part of the escape kit. If you come down, and you're likely to come down to the sea if you're in a Catalina. So you have a rubber raft, a revolver, some biscuits, and the escape maps, which are actually they show the currents and the wind direction to give you some idea where you are when you're flying over enemy territory.
So sorry, Kevin, you're saying that original maps are either in silk or acetate?
Yeah, these are taken from the American ones, and they're extraordinary state-of-the-art printing of it. They're so detailed, and that's another example of what happens in war. They push technology. They're absolutely brilliant. People look at them, they can't believe how accurate they are. Printed on both sides, and they're absolutely perfect today. Because if you come down the water, it's no good having a paper map. You've got to be able to scrunch it up and put it in your jacket. And the Australian ones were printed on silk on one side. They used to use them as scarves. They weren't quite as detailed.
So this form here is referencing that as well as the topography as a upper land.
That's right.
And also that the form of the hat, is that right?
The form of the hat represents the civilians of the Philippines, who suffered immensely. And I know it's not the absolutely proper shape for a Filipino, is it salakot hat?
Salakot hat.
Which goes out like that, but it was too difficult to cover. It represents the actual formation of the islands, the main islands, and as well the civilians, because that's sort of the quintessential generic form of a hat for people in Asia at that time. There's actually a still coming up here. Now this was from a tiny little photo, like about that big, and on the back, you know, it said street scene Manila. And again, this is sort of luck, you know. Well, the next picture that comes up in a while is house building in Manila, and you'll see people with those classic hats in the photo.
Well, it is a wonderful chance for you to actually delve into something that otherwise probably you will never have.
That's right, yeah, it was. It was a story that I needed to deal with, but that was the opportunity, so, yeah.
Oh, here we are.
Okay, thanks, Pip.